Welcome to this episode of Author Success Show. The special guest we have today is Jessie Kwak. Jessie is a sci fi novelist, a ghostwriter, and the author of two productivity guides for creative people, from chaos to creativity and from big idea to book. If you want to know how to develop your own writing practice, or if you want to know whether you should be developing one in the first place or working with a ghostwriter, or if you want to know how can you sell all your books and merchandise on your own author website, then this episode is for you. Hey Jesse, welcome to Author Success Show.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We usually have authors who've successfully written one book, and that itself is quite inspiring. But you have written over a dozen books. So I'm super excited to understand how did you actually get started with this journey of being an author?
Yeah, so I started writing when I was a kid and wrote my first book in middle school in a couple
Mhm.
of spiral bound notebooks by hand. And just kept writing ever since. And so I love science fiction and fantasy, and that's the
Mhm.
genre that I write in, mostly sci-fi, and nonfiction as well.
Mhm.
So I have most of, I guess the bulk of my books would be the science fiction, but the ones that I'm really excited about, that the next one that's coming out is this nonfiction book called From Big Idea to Book. And
Right.
it's kind of about the writing process and helping other people figure out what works for them and helping
Mm.
them get to a finished book.
Amazing. I see that a lot of people as children used to love writing, but then they get sucked into this social norm of going to college and getting a traditional job. So, did you ever work in a corporate job and then one day decide to become an author, or did you had that plan throughout your teens and into adulthood?
I just kind of figured that it would be something I did on the side for my entire life. I knew a lot of writers probably didn't make a ton of money from their books. And so I thought, well, I'll get a job doing something serious and
Mm.
always kind of have the writing thing on the side. So I did get a English literature degree when I went to college. So I knew I was still kind of interested
Yeah.
in that area. And what I ended up doing was getting into copywriting eventually after
Mm.
some little false starts here and there. And so right now my day job is as a freelance copywriter and ghostwriter.
Mm.
Um, and so the fiction is still technically something that I do on the side, but I now can free up so much more of my day as a
Mm.
freelancer to work on the fiction and
Yeah.
have my client writing like in the afternoons where I'm not feeling as like fresh and creative and I can work on nonfiction as opposed to, you know, spaceship battles and all of that stuff that takes a lot of creative energy.
No, that's such a smart way to balance your profession and your passion because what you do professionally will also help you improve yourself as a writer, right? Doing
Mhm.
copywriting and ghostwriting and all of that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it really taught me was that you don't have to wait for the muse to be
Mm,
creative.
right.
And when I was first starting writing, I would wanted to be in the mood, and sometimes I wouldn't know what to write, and I would I'd go away from my book for a few weeks, and I'd come back to
Mm,
it and be like, okay, I guess maybe I feel like I'm in the mood to write again. And then when I started working, my very first copywriting job was as a catalog copywriter.
okay.
And, every single day I just had, it was a children's clothing company actually. And
Okay.
so just cute dresses and shoes that have like dinosaurs on them are just deposited on my desk and I had to write about them and it didn't matter if I was in the mood.
Right. I'm
So
sure that has
definitely
helped
taken
you.
that.
Right. So, what I also wanted to ask was in your latest book, you're actually teaching people how they can start a practice that will support them in their writing. So, could you share? I know the book is yet to be released, it's still on pre order, but probably by the time this episode goes live, it will be available. So, could you just tell us a few tips on how an author can get started with some serious writing practice?
Yeah. I really think the big thing is to just, as you're calling it a practice, it does need to be kind of a regular practice. If you're
Hmm.
going to get into meditation, you would set yourself time every day to do it. If you're going to get into yoga, if you're going to get into running,
Yeah.
you make it a practice, and
Yeah.
then you get in that habit. So that is the first thing that I would recommend, is to really take the time and figure out when every day you're going to write. It doesn't have to be every day, but if you say, okay, 3 mornings a week, or every Saturday for 2 hours, and look at your schedule and really figure out when you're going to prioritize your writing time. Because if you really want to make better yourself as a writer, or finish the book that you're working on, the big idea that you've got in your head, like, you need to commit that time and you need to make it a priority. So that's definitely step number one.
And once a person decides that I'm going to do this only on weekends, or every morning from 5 to 6, I'm going to be showing up in front of my computer to write something, how do they ensure that they have a kind of flow and they don't get stuck?
Yeah, right. How do you not get stuck? It definitely happens. And it's such a personal process to kind of figure out what works for you, or what, okay, this didn't particularly work, but I might try this instead. And that's one of kind of the goals of the book, is going through, it's not just my experience, how I write, but also interviews with other authors, and so giving people kind of a grab bag of ideas to choose from. But one thing I would definitely say is, don't skip kind of the warm up part of writing. Like, if you just sit down with kind of the blank page, you're like, okay, I am just going to start writing a poem, or I'm going to, whatever it is that you're working on. Oftentimes, if you take, say, 5 minutes out of your allotted time for writing, and do, some free writing, or maybe read through a little bit of what you wrote yesterday or last week, and just kind of get yourself warmed up, instead of expecting to jump in cold, just like you would if you were, going to go play tennis. Yeah.
This is such a
That
new
can help keep
concept.
you in the
I've
flow.
never heard of this, but this is really powerful, getting into that warm up mode so that you don't have to stare at the blank document every time. So, Jessie,
Yeah.
you also mentioned that you've interviewed other experts like Joanna Penn and so many other people in your book. So I consider you to be an expert already, because you've written so many books and that's your profession as well. But in spite of that, you've interviewed others. So what was your thought process behind reaching out to other people to contribute to your book?
It really started with the very first nonfiction book that I wrote, kind of in this how-to series, From Chaos to Creativity, which is about kind of building a creative productivity system for people who are more like, artists and writers and creative brained people. And the reason, and I also interviewed a bunch of people for that book. And the reason was because I said, okay, I have this productivity system that works for me. Surely that will work for everyone else. And it totally doesn't, it's so individualized.
Every
And the
person
same with the
is
writing
different.
process. Yeah. So I have so many friends that are writers, and I'll say, okay, well, this is what works for me. And they're like, whoa, that would never work for me. I do it this way instead. So I knew it wouldn't be useful to a wider audience if it was just about how I do things, which is why I reached out to as many people as I could find who did things differently.
That makes total sense. And it also needs some humility from the author's side to accept that my method is not the only one that works. I should probably also ask others. So how easy or difficult was it for you to line up these experts for interviewing them for your book? What was your process to reach them out and get a yes?
Well, I started with people that I knew would be kind of a fairly easy yes, because that's good for your ego, and then it helps you build up the strength to talk to somebody else. So I started with friends or people that I already had a relationship with. And then from there, it was mostly cold emails. And so just finding somebody that I thought would be a really great addition, emailing them and saying, I am, for example, Joanna Penn, saying, hey, I love your podcast. I really love this, what you talk about with how you research, and I'd love to include that in this book that I'm working on. So having a very specific ask, I think
Yeah.
helped, not just, I want to talk about your writing process, but here's a specific way that I want you to contribute. And I also, part of my day job is, I'm interviewing people a lot for that, for either for the ghostwriting stuff I'm doing or for writing articles. So I have spent a lot of time sending cold emails to experts, trying to get them to talk to me for a few minutes.
Right. I think that's a fantastic tip. When you really personalize it and have a specific ask, it makes the other
Mm-hmm.
person feel that this is not a cold email that's sent out to hundreds of people, but she exactly knows what she needs from me and how I can contribute. So they would respect you for that. And that's why I think you've had these amazing people be a part of your book.
Mm-hmm.
So this book, I would say, Jessie, is going to help authors who love writing, but they just need that guidance to become a better writer and be consistent with their writing practice. However, I don't think this book is meant for your ghostwriting clients, because those are people who do not want to be developing this practice. They want to outsource it to you. So, what are some tips you would give to somebody if they're thinking, should I work with a ghostwriter or should I become a writer myself?
The interesting thing is that a lot of my ghostwriting clients do write quite a bit. I have definitely worked with people who aren't writers, but many of my ghostwriting clients either have already written a book, or they've, in one case, a person that I'm working with right now, he has written tons of articles on this topic, and he's given presentations, and he has a podcast, and so he's got all this content, and he wants to make it into a book, but he doesn't have the time. So I find more it's people who don't have the time to write a book but know they want to, but are still kind of that they have that expertise and often the writing skill. I guess your question was kind of, how do you know if you would rather outsource or learn to write it yourself? Time is definitely going to be a
I
big part
think
of
it's
that
an important
question.
factor. Yeah. They probably realize that I want this book out in the next 6 months, but I just cannot have the time scheduled on my calendar to write. Then it's probably
Mm-hmm.
wise to reach out to a ghostwriter.
Right. And often it can be really helpful to get that outside perspective. When you have somebody like me who can do a lot of, interview style questions and make you think about things in a way that you might not normally, even if you are writing the book yourself, it can be super helpful to, talk to somebody and have somebody ask you questions about whatever topic it is that you're going to write about, because they might have different ideas and just kind of push you in a different direction. And I've done that with from big idea to book. I would sit down with other writers and say, okay, what do you want to know about this? Like, here's, my thoughts, and ask me questions so it can kind of get me inspired.
Right. So they are like basically beta readers, but they come much earlier on in the process.
Yes.
Right. And as you said, as an author, I may think that these are the 7 points I need to cover in my book. But when somebody starts asking me questions, that's when we know that there are more things that they probably need to know. And these are things that are not that relevant. So it actually helps you to outline your book better, even if you're going to write your book yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very different perspective, Jessie, and thank you for sharing that. And you are one of the few authors who write both fiction and nonfiction, right? Because I've seen fiction authors who are so committed to fiction that they would never write anything else. But you are comfortable with both genres. So how does your writing process change to suit the different needs of the different types of books?
It is very different between the two types of writing. I need to be a lot more kind of isolated and not interrupted to really get into the fiction. And part of that is, you're rehearsing dialogue and you've got characters and you're really trying to figure out somebody's motivation. And, if my husband comes and knocks on the door, I'm like, I'm in the middle of a sentence, like, please go away. But with nonfiction, for me, I find it a lot easier to kind of bounce in and out of it. And you can break it down into smaller chunks. Like, I'm going to work on this, this subsection today. But I think the biggest thing that I always find myself wanting to do is if I'm jumping back and forth between writing fiction and nonfiction. With nonfiction, you can Google something to get inspired. You know, you can be
Yeah.
like, okay, what have other people written on this
Mm.
topic? Or you can look up a fact. And I'll find myself like, I wish I could Google why my character did that. Or like,
Right.
oh, what is this next plot point? What should I do here? I want to Google it, and you can't. Google doesn't know
Help.
anything that's in my head, turns out.
Exactly. I think you need to go into a different mind space altogether to write two different genres, right?
Yeah.
Also, Jessie, I think because of the success of your sci-fi books, you also have merchandise related to your books on your website. So, how did that idea come about?
I it was kind of things that people started asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so it was just, one thing at a time. I was like, oh, okay, there's a character that has a necklace, and during the beginning of the pandemic, when we're all kind of hunkered down in quarantine and everyone's
Mm.
developing new hobbies, I got a bunch of that kind of sculpting clay that you can bake. And
Wow, you
so
made them yourself?
yeah, so I was
Amazing.
like, I'm gonna learn how to do this. And it was just kind of a thing to keep me busy and from going crazy from not being able to go out.
I mean, you're truly walking the talk by being so creative. And also, Jesse, most authors stick to Amazon or other online platforms to sell their books, but you have them all on Amazon as well, but also on your website. So, what's the
Mhm.
idea behind having them on your website to sell directly to your client or to your readers?
I found that, again, people were asking for that. They would say, oh, I want to buy this book in a way that supports you best.
Mm,
And I use a service called BookFunnel, which hopefully your viewers are familiar with. And
mm-hmm.
so they make it really easy to deliver books to people. And so you
Right.
can sell books and just get a book like automatically delivered
Mm,
to somebody's email. And then print books, obviously, if you buy a print book off Amazon, it's not going to be signed by me. So people do like
right.
kind of the print books from me as well.
Right. So, for the print, book funnel is predominantly for the ebook delivery, right?
Yes, yeah.
So for the print books, how
So
do you set up the back end? Because many authors may think that it's too cumbersome to handle all the merchandise. So how do you do that?
I I have my website set up on WordPress, and I use WooCommerce to
Mm-hmm.
deliver, or to create the storefront.
Yeah.
And then as far as the delivery, I've got books here and I package them up. And WooCommerce makes it really easy because you can just print out a label with shipping.
Mm.
Um, and so it's fairly simple. I mean, honestly, if I was selling like 100 orders a day off my website, it would not be sustainable. But
Mm.
for, an order every week or so, then it's just pretty easy. Like package it
Yeah.
up and
Do
toss
you
it to the
also
post
sign
office.
the book with your like author signature and stuff?
Yeah.
That makes it different, right? Because on Amazon, you probably cannot do that.
Yeah, exactly. And people
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So do you order your books and have some copies with you so that you can do this? So do you uh, like use a service to pre-order your books and have them with you so that you can ship them?
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for Amazon, it's print on demand, or do you also partner with your printing company to ship it to Amazon as well?
I actually upload it both to Amazon's print on demand service, and also
Mm-hmm.
then the wider distribution is through Ingram Spark.
Mm-hmm.
And I normally order copies from Ingram. It kind of
Right.
depends on who has the better like author author copy deal.
Yeah.
Um, but the problem with Amazon, you can't do a print pre-order. As soon
Mm.
as you hit publish, then your print book is live on Amazon, at least currently.
Right.
Hopefully they'll change that at some point.
Yeah.
But you can do print pre-orders through Ingram. So I'll upload it there first, and then I
Mm.
can order my author copies and have those ready to go. And then the day that it goes live, then I'll publish it on Amazon as well.
Right. So this is the next question that I was anyway going to ask about why do you set up your books on pre-order? Some authors believe that it doesn't add any value to them, and they just directly hit the publish button on the day they want to make it available. But you have set up a nice pre-order campaign. So how does it benefit you, Jessie?
It really helps, I think, with the newsletter that I have. I can just keep like tagging people and be like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm working on these books. And every newsletter, I'll have one or two people like, oh, right, I'll go buy those. And I know there's the idea of like, do the pre-orders count on your launch day versus is it better to, that's a whole question that I don't have a very good answer to. But I have found that it's nice to have something that people can just buy right away when they're thinking about your book. So when I say, oh, hey, I've, check out the covers, then people can just get it and not have to remember to come back in 2 months when the book goes live.
Especially when you have created an audience who are eagerly looking forward to your next book. Why make them wait when you can just make them pre-order?
Yeah.
Right. So what are some tips that you would like to give authors to build this email list? Because when you're selling on Amazon, you're never going to know who the buyers are. So what are some smart ways to collect their names and emails?
Yeah. So the thing that has worked hands down the best for me is to have a free story that's related to my series. So I have a couple different stories that I've tried over the years. Right now, because I'm have a series that I'm going to be launching in May, I have a prequel novella for that series that kind of features the characters, and I have that listed on several different places where people can download it for free if they give me their email address. So I've probably I put it up about a month ago, and I think I've gotten a couple hundred subscribers so far from that.
Wow, nice.
But what that's by far the best.
Yeah, I'm sure that works really well for fiction because it piques people's curiosity, right? They want to know the prequel and what happens afterwards. So what kind of a lead magnet are you using for your Chaos to Creativity as well as the new book?
I have not been nearly as like good at the marketing, or at least at collecting the emails and stuff for that. When I first launched From Chaos to Creativity, I also launched a series of kind of weekly motivational check-in emails that I was sending out. And I just realized it was too much. It was too much for me. I was like, I'm not going to be able to sustain this. And so I backed off on that quite a bit. So I don't really have a big like mailing list or platform for the nonfiction. I've really just, I figured I can only really focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So
I think that's also something really sensible because if you have to, maintain your sanity and not get burnt out, you need to choose the kind of things you need to do. And you don't have to do everything at a 10 on 10 level. Whatever is more important, I think you're just focusing and prioritizing that, which I think is fine.
Right. And the two nonfiction books are out with a traditional publisher. And so they're selling them at events and they're sending newsletters out about them. So there's already like a marketing engine behind those books that I don't necessarily need to feed in the same way that nobody's going to tell anybody about my science fiction unless I do it. So that's also kind of why I chose to put my energy there.
Yeah. So this brings us to the question of why did you go with a traditional publisher for your nonfiction books when you have already successfully self-published your fiction novels?
Partly because I know the editor who worked on my first book. And so we were actually talking about it one day and I pitched her the idea and she loved it and kind of basically bought it on the spot. And I really trust this publishing company. It's called Microcosm Publishing. And I live in Portland, Oregon. They're local to Portland. So they just do fantastic work. All of their books are really well designed.
I love the covers of both the books.
Yeah, they've got a great sense of business and a great like marketing engine, essentially. And so I knew if I was going to write this book, they would do a much better job of getting it in front of the people that it would help than I would be able to do on my own. So it was a very strategic decision in that way.
Right. A lot of times we have this generalistic view as to this is good and that is bad and this industry works this way, but then we don't realize that a company is made up of people, right? And if you trust a particular individual and that company is unique, then traditional publishing can work great. And it's
Mhm.
really difficult to, I think it's not wise to just say that this works and that doesn't work, because everything is so different and unique. And if you can figure out a way that works for you, then why not have the best of both worlds?
Yeah, and I have definitely found some crossover from,
Mm,
readers that have picked up one of my traditionally published books and then came over to my website and were like, "Oh, I love science fiction too," and started getting into that. Or,
cool.
I have stories that are in like anthologies that are traditionally published.
Mm,
And the most recent person who bought something off my website mentioned that she found my story in this anthology that another publishing company put out.
right.
So anywhere you can kind of get a little
Exactly.
bit more reach.
Yeah. So you have a beautiful website, Jesse, but did you have this website when you launched your first book, or did you build it later?
I've actually I've had some sort of web presence for years and years, and
Mm,
it's been slowly evolving over time. It was just kind of a writing blog for a little bit, and some of the early iterations were very ugly and like self-coded. But yeah, so I did have jessiequack.com has been my digital home for quite some time.
Hmm. I think this is something that all first-time authors should, take note of, because people feel that, oh, this is just my first book. What if I don't write another one? And they don't take their personal brand seriously, and they don't even create a website. But you had the long-term vision. You knew that you're not going to stop with just one book, and I think that probably, told you that you need to have your online presence and your online address, and you've built it so beautifully. So before we say goodbye, I would just like you to give one piece of advice to all those aspiring authors out there who have such immense stories and talents but are shying away from writing a book.
One piece of advice. I mean, I want to say just do it. Just sit down and write. I think what one thing that scares people away is this idea that it's a very long process, and it
Hmm.
is,
Hmm.
but it's something that can be taken into smaller, manageable chunks.
Right.
And if you set yourself kind of smaller goals, say, I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day, or I'm going to write 300 words, or I'm going to go on a walk and tell myself part of that story in a voice memo.
Hmm.
I think it can be, you'll be so surprised looking back at the end of a year or 5 years as to how far you've come. But it can definitely feel like a slog when you're in the middle of writing
Yeah.
something, especially if it's not going well. But there are highs and there are lows, and I think the highs are well worth it.
Yeah, very well said, Jesse. So, where can people find out more about you and your books?
Yeah, jessiequack.com is the place to go. JESSIEKWAK. And there you'll find links to my nonfiction, my fiction, my
Mhm.
copywriting. And
And your
yeah, I
pendants.
guess, oh yes, and my lovely pendant that you can buy.
Amazing.
um,
Thank you
yeah.
so
And then
much.
I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. But
Okay, perfect. We'll have all the links right below in the show notes so people can find them in one place. And thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on Author Success Show.
yeah, thank you so much. This is so much fun talking to you.